Welcome to Mindnomics, the channel where psychology meets money, decision-making, and the hidden mental shortcuts that quietly shape our everyday lives. Every week, we explore the fascinating science behind why we spend, save, invest, hesitate, and sometimes make decisions that seem perfectly logical until we understand what our brains are really doing.
Why does an ordinary coffee mug suddenly become worth far more the moment it belongs to you? Okay, I know, it sounds like an absurd question. I mean, a mug is literally just a mug, right? But as we dive into today's explainer, you're going to see how this one seemingly ridiculous question actually unlocked one of the most profound mysteries in all of behavioral economics.
Let's get right into Section 1, the coffee mug mystery, and the 1980s experiment that changed economics. To really grasp this, we have to travel back to a time when economists assumed humans were strictly rational. The idea was simple. If you're willing to pay $10 for an item, you'd sell it for $10. Simple math. But three researchers, Richard Thaler, Daniel Kahneman, and Jack Knetsch, decided to put that assumption to a real-world test, right inside a university classroom.
And the setup they used was brilliantly simple. The researchers went in and randomly handed out these ordinary coffee mugs to half the students in the room. The other half got absolutely nothing. Then they asked the students with the mugs, hey, how much money would you need to sell this? And they asked the empty-handed students, how much would you actually pay to buy one? The results were completely staggering. The students who were randomly gifted the mug demanded more than twice as much money to give it up compared to what the buyers were actually willing to pay. Think about that. The object itself didn't change one bit. The only thing that changed was the feeling of ownership.
Exactly. Which brings us to Section 2, the science of loss aversion and why your brain hates losing. What those researchers tapped into is this ancient, evolutionary operating system known in behavioral economics as prospect theory. See, thousands of years ago, protecting your food or your tools, that was literally a matter of life or death. Because of that, our brains evolved to fiercely, almost violently, protect our resources.
And the math behind this ancient wiring is just so fascinating. Researchers have actually quantified this feeling. The psychological pain of losing something feels roughly twice as powerful as the joy of gaining that exact same thing. So losing a $100 bill from your wallet? That stings twice as much as the sheer thrill of finding $100 on the sidewalk. When those students in the 1980s got the mug, selling it didn't feel like a simple transaction anymore. Their brains processed giving it up as a painful loss.
But the problem is, this creates a massive trap for us today. Let's look at Section 3, pricing memories, not objects, and the real-world ripple effect. Fast forward to the modern world, and your brain is still using that exact same survival mechanism to furiously protect things that definitely aren't keeping you alive. Instead of guarding a winter food supply, it's guarding, unused exercise equipment, tangled phone chargers, or clothes you literally haven't worn in a decade. We hold on to all this clutter because letting it go triggers that deep-seated evolutionary pain of loss.
Yeah, and this beautifully illustrates how it affects the biggest financial decisions of our entire lives, especially real estate. When buyers look at a house, they're coldly calculating the square footage, current interest rates, and comparable sales in the neighborhood. They're pricing utility. But the owner? They aren't trying to be greedy when they list their home way above market value. They are pricing the birthdays celebrated in that living room, the memories of their kids learning to walk down the hallway, the really difficult seasons they survived under that roof. Psychologically, those priceless memories become permanently baked into the owner's valuation of the physical property.
You see this psychological mismatch absolutely everywhere. I mean, think about scrolling through Facebook Marketplace.
Oh my gosh, all the time.
You see someone asking basically full retail price for a dusty 5-year-old treadmill. To the buyer, it's just a heavy piece of old metal. But to the seller, it represents the very day they promised themselves they'd get healthy.
Spot on.
Or look at finance. Investors will stubbornly refuse to sell plummeting stocks or cratering crypto coins. It's not about the financial logic anymore. It's because hitting that sell button forces them to accept a permanent loss, which means finally admitting to themselves, hey, I was wrong. We even do this with dead-end careers and unfulfilling relationships. We stay put just to avoid the emotional pain of letting go. Now, it's one thing when we accidentally trap ourselves in our own clutter or bad investments. But as we explore in Section 4, the corporate ownership trap, businesses actually recognize this glitch in our ancient wiring and actively weaponize it against us. Looking at how companies use this bias against you, well, this is where the endowment effect goes from just a quirky feature of human nature to a highly calculated corporate strategy.
Exactly, and the crucial piece here is how the corporate playbook manufactures that sense of ownership. Think about free digital trials for Netflix, Spotify, or Adobe. You log in, you build your custom playlists, you save your favorite shows. Before you've ever paid a single dime, you feel like that account is yours. When the trial ends, canceling doesn't feel like just opting out of a purchase, it feels like they are actively taking away your music. It's the exact same reason car dealerships practically beg you to take a test drive. Once you sit behind that wheel and adjust the mirrors to your liking, your brain starts imagining the car as yours. Even those generous no-questions-asked return policies exist entirely because companies know that once an item crosses the threshold into your home, the endowment effect kicks in, making returning it feel incredibly painful.
It is such a powerful force. But the story doesn't actually stop at accepted wisdom. In Section 5, the 2007 scientific twist, we have to ask, what if the famous experiment was wrong? Because for decades, the endowment effect was treated as undeniable gospel in the world of behavioral economics. But then, two researchers introduced a really fascinating nuance into the narrative, asking if we had fundamentally misunderstood the entire coffee mug experiment from the start.
I love this part. It's such a great moment in the scientific debate. Researchers Charles Plott and Catherine Thaler published a critique asking a very fair question. What if the experiment itself influenced the results? They argued that, hey, maybe those students in the 1980s weren't actually placing a higher emotional value on the mugs. What if they were simply confused by the complex buying and selling instructions they were given in the classroom? And when Plott and Thaler actually ran the experiment again, but with much clearer, simplified instructions to remove any chance of misunderstanding, that massive valuation gap between the buyers and the sellers, it almost completely disappeared in several of their trials.
So the big question is, does the endowment effect actually exist? Today, the scientific consensus is that it absolutely does. But with one really important caveat. Context is literally everything. If an object is tied to your identity, like your childhood home or your personal car, you are highly likely to overvalue it. But if you look at professional day traders or retail stores, they don't experience the endowment effect at all. Why? Because the items they hold aren't personal possessions. They're just inventory meant for resale. Their personal identity isn't wrapped up in the object.
Which brings us to the most actionable part of this whole explainer. Section 6, Outsmarting Your Own Brain, with a step-by-step possession audit. Now that we know our minds naturally blur the line between our identities and our inventory, we can actually build a solid system to pause, zoom out, and objectively evaluate all these things that are weighing us down.
We've put together a really practical 3-step position audit for you. First up, consciously separate the memory from the physical object. Remember that selling an old, dusty guitar doesn't erase the memory of the college band you played in. A quick photograph can preserve that memory just as well without taking up all that physical or mental space.
That's such a good point. Then step 2 is evaluating the item's current market utility. You have to look at it like a buyer would. Does this item or this stock or even this specific career path actually serve your life right now, today, based on current facts? If the honest answer is no, then you are letting loss aversion dictate your future.
And that leads us perfectly into step 3. Whenever you catch yourself hesitating to clear out physical clutter, or cut a bad investment, or even walk away from an outdated life choice, you have to force your brain out of its defensive crouch by asking one incredibly specific question.
If I didn't already own this, would I buy it today? It is such a simple reframing trick, but it's deeply powerful. Every single dollar tied up in a losing stock, every square foot of your home given over to a box of unused cables, and every year spent in a job you've clearly outgrown carries a massive opportunity cost. You just can't grasp the new opportunities in front of you if both of your hands are tightly gripping the past, all just to avoid the momentary sting of letting go.
Thank you for joining us on Mindnomics, where psychology meets money, decision-making, and the hidden patterns that shape our everyday lives. If today's episode changed the way you think, subscribe and join us as we uncover more of the fascinating psychology behind the choices we make. Until next time, stay curious, and remember to ask yourself, if I didn't already own this, would I buy it today?